Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connery, which with me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And, boy, do we have fights to talk about. We're drowning in fights. Absolutely drowning. The UFC seems to be... Phil, tell me if this seems accurate to your read on the situation. It seems that in the event that a bunch of fighters do get the Rona, that the UFC is just trying to crank out as many fights and as many sales as they can. It's basically like the strategy strikes me as 3 events for the price of 1 event's bad PR.
Yeah, and also they've got 42 events to put out that they're contractually obliged to put out over the course of the year, and they know that this period where they're allowed to put stuff on, it might not last all that long.
Right.
So they're just like, multiple events per week, to the extent that we're not even going to be covering one of them.
This is the new normal. I like envisioning a future where we just consistently vacillate back and forth. We have 2 months where there's no fights, and you and I get to come up with all these topic ideas and whatnot, and yell at vaping scooter gang kids to pass the time. And then there's going to be a 3-week stretch where there's 80 events. and these strings of events crammed into a small amount of time directly cause the next great death spike, which causes a 2-month gap in the schedule.
I will say I'm pretty grateful for the fact that the UFC is so clearly tiering its content during this particular splurge that of the 2 upcoming cards, Teixeira and the Teixeira card and the Overeem versus Harris one, there's a pretty clear differentiation in which one of these we would like to cover, and indeed which ones we can cover because we don't have time.
Yeah, that's right. I should mention that right up top. People were asking on Twitter, are we going to cover this midweek event? Because in case you don't know, there are 3 events this week, basically, in the span of 7 days. And the answer is no. It is Tuesday right now. And so, as you know, the show comes out on Wednesday, and not always that early on Wednesday. Though I've been making a better effort of that lately. So we are planning instead to do a recap. We're going to talk about it in review, and throw that up on the Patreon, and hopefully, get, one of those VSG kids, the aforementioned terrors of online MMA social media to join us for that. So we will be talking about it, but not on today's episode. Today, we are simply devoting ourselves to UFC 249. Some very big, meaningful shit happened at a very strange event, that I nonetheless, at least at points, enjoyed. I this may surprise people who were really upset that I had mixed feelings on last week's episode about this card and, just the world right now. It doesn't seem crazy to me to have mixed feelings, if anything, but it may surprise you to know that I do like MMA. So, I am excited to talk to you about these fights. Particularly the main event with Justin Gaethje. I'm really looking forward to breaking that performance down. But after we cover basically the biggest fights from that card, we are going to move on straight ahead to previewing next weekend's card, which is headlined by Alistair Overeem and Walt Harris. There's about 3 fights in that card that I think are really interesting, and I think that's the number that we will end up covering. So let's cut the shit, Phil, and talk about UFC 249. Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson. There was Henry Cejudo retired. Dominic Cruz lost and accused the referee of being drunk, which rules. That is the best sore loser move I've ever heard. I love it. There's other stuff too, but let's go ahead and get in on the main event. Can I say up front, I feel like we did pretty good with this one. We have a reputation for being bad at picking fights. I just want to point out that in this case, it was very unfair. The only thing that, the main thing that I couldn't account for was something I'd never seen before. It was basically the question of, I know Justin Gaethje's got much better at counterpunching. I can see why that style would work very well. In fact, perhaps uniquely well against Tony Ferguson's unique style. What I could not say with any certainty was, can Justin Gaethje stay calm and maintain that for 5 rounds? And in fact, he did. It was absolutely the performance of Justin Gaethje's career, which is crazy because like this has been a career filled with wars. Maybe it wasn't even close to the best fight of his career, but in terms of how good he looked, how competent and in control of the bout he was at basically every moment except for like 1 or 2, this was a defining performance from Justin Gaethje.
Yeah, this was remarkable, and I think something which can be credited to both Justin Gaethje and Trevor Whitman, who's produced once again a fighter, as he did with Rose Namajunas, who has visibly gone from being a lot of raw potential to being one of the best coached and, frankly, most skilled fighters in the world.
Yeah, and it all tends to be really simple shit, too. That's what I love about Trevor Whitman's fighters, is like both Rose Namajunas and Justin Gaethje used to have a real penchant for throwing baffling, insane shit at their opponents. Where they were basically unstructured fighters. Sort of brawlers for Rose Namajunas, like a panic brawler; for Justin Gaethje, a holy shit do I love blood type of brawler. But what he has turned both of those fighters into is so pared down and yet so much deeper, which is basically the thing I always want to see technically out of fighters. Is like, I don't care how many different Phil, am I about to quote the Bruce Lee line? I don't care how many different kicks you can throw. Okay, I care about how adept you are with the tools that really work for you. And this fight was basically, from Justin Gaethje, an occasional one, a lot of 2s and 3s, and a low kick. Every once in a while we saw a little uppercut to the body. Every once in a while a little left hook to the body. But pretty much it was counter right hands followed by left hooks and low kicks. And yet there was so much nuance to what sounds like such a simple approach. And it was like, I don't know, this felt like a refutation of the more Tony Ferguson way of fighting. Like, Ferguson really gets by on having that huge diversity of attack. But Justin Gaethje, I think, and Trevor Whitman, very correctly identified the dynamic that you and I noticed that we at least expected to happen in the first round, that like Ferguson doesn't do an awful lot of feinting. He kind of just walks into the pocket, and when you hit him, he's ready to swing back, and most people panic, most people freak out. They just basically keyed in on these little moments when they're like, okay, Justin Gaethje made distance his trigger in this fight, and he just maintained distance and forced Tony Ferguson, Mr. Bad Eyesight himself, to reach and overcommit, and every single time that happened, he tried to punish him, and then he got off on an angle. It was like I said, so simple, but so deep. I loved it. I don't know. There's nothing I love more than seeing fighters like genuinely grow. And this was a completely different Justin Gaethje from even the one we saw in the Cerrone fight. It was such a leap forward from that already tremendously different Justin Gaethje.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this was, as I said, it's very rare you see a performance like this from a fighter like this deep into their career, because he's not a prospect. He's been fighting at a high level for years. And there's, as we've said on multiple occasions, you really genuinely, as an analytical expectation, you should think that fighters are going to be pretty much who they are for the entirety of their career. So to see something which is quite this out of character is over 5 rounds against someone whose entire modus operandi is to break down the shells that people have built around themselves and to expose who they actually are. Like, genuinely remarkable. It's the front runner for performance of the year, I think, at the moment.
It's not just it is something really rare. Like you said, it's a style change. Like this fight really showed not just what counter punching can do, but like what a counter puncher can do. What makes that style. I don't know. I think, people who listen to the show know I love to talk about style archetypes. It's one of my favorite ways to understand fighters. I'm a human being. I like categories, goddammit. And I think that especially in MMA, like the counterpuncher is by far the rarest. We see plenty of guys, as people will always make fun of me for, that I have described as boxer punchers. We see plenty of outfighters. We see a lot of pressure fighters of varying degrees of skill. Counterpunching seems to be pretty hard, and I think the reasons for that are pretty simple. Like, there's this feeling that you have to, like with counterpunching, defense comes first. You have to be able to evade the shot coming at you in order to counter it. You have to be able to make the person miss in order to make them pay for missing. And that's tough. We've talked about this from various angles in MMA, why defense is so hard, but it really just boils down to like the other guy walking up to you might do anything. So guessing what he's going to do is really, really tricky. I think from Justin Gaethje here, we saw like the birth of a counterpunching style that really, really makes sense for MMA. Like I said, it was very distance triggered. It started a lot.
Yeah.
It started a lot with the footwork, which was better than it's ever been. Like, it was one of my main complaints about Gaethje's performance against Cowboy, was that all the ideas were there, but he put himself in a lot of weird positions executing. It was much more consistent here. His feet stayed under him. The head movement was really nice, but what it really came down to was just getting the right distance, and that being the trigger that he made Ferguson look amateur, honestly. Like, there's a lot of exchanges where you see Ferguson coming in and he's just like loading up on a strike. Like, you would never get away with that shit in boxing, but you get away with it all the time in MMA because people are so committed to trying to guess what you're going to do. Gaethje, like, he's pared that down. So it's just like, all right, when you reach this point and I can tell that you're committing yourself to something, whatever, I'm going to step off and throw this right hand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that was one of the dynamics that we sort of called out. I think probably one of the better dynamics we called out before the fight is that we said, it's okay to question things which are established about fighters, even elite ones. And we basically said that Tony Ferguson isn't a great pressure fighter.
Yeah,
he's
some
someone
people
who fights
were
at a
pissed off about
tremendously
that.
high pace, but he's not actually particularly good when he's asked to track people down because he just has to go nuts at them, basically. Yeah. It's what he had to do against Cerrone and Barboza, and because he wants that slice of range where he's, able to pump his jab, and
yes,
he ideally wants the two of you to be coming into it, or the two of you to be static in that position. And yeah, like you said, it was the distance triggers for Gaethje, because whenever they were about to close into that distance, he just crushed the last bit of it and cracked him with the right hand.
Yeah, a lot of these were like interruptive counters. It was really just like as Ferguson was coming in, loading up, that's when he would get cracked, because Gaethje was just waiting for him to get to that punching distance.
Yeah, he would either just crush the distance with the right hand, or as Ferguson took the last step to close range, he would kick his leg out.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much it. And then, as you said, it was the left hook. And here, we also called this. We said Ferguson is, he's a flow fighter as well.
Yeah.
He's all of his stuff with, the Imanari rolls and the dodge rolling to get out of situations and all this other kind of stuff. It's very much, you can clearly see that it's him reusing inertia and momentum.
Yes, as long as he can keep tacking on further moves, he's pretty comfortable.
Yeah. And we said, what's going to happen if he starts doing his classic thing of stepping in on a big strike and then just spinning round? What's the counter to that? Is probably Gaethje's left hook. Mm-hmm. And it was.
Uh-huh.
Because Ferguson would multiple times step in on like a big jab to close in on Gaethje or a right hand, and then he would try and turn and in this situation he's normally either trying to hide behind his shoulder or dodge a right hand or something which is coming back, and Gaethje would just clobber him with the left hook, completely out of position, because that's not what that defense is there to avoid.
Right.
It's just not built to avoid left hooks. It just, it just put him into harm's way and, hideously out of position, like, multiple times.
Gaethje's got a really nice left hook, too.
Mm-hmm. It's his best punch.
Yeah, I would love to get the opportunity to talk to Trevor Whitman and ask him about it, because, like, one thing that stands out to me is it's a very, it's an old school left hook. It's a very Joe Louis looking punch. Like, he keeps the elbow down for most of it. It's almost an uppercut. It comes it stays very close to the ribs and is really, really tight and inside. So a lot of times Gaethje throws it like at super close range or whatever. Most people's hooks would be bounced off the outside of the shoulder. And Ferguson, who we noted, is very good at like getting his shoulders and elbows and hands up, parrying and blocking shots, is really used to just sort of keeping that hand traffic in the way. But it's like this style of hook isn't really an outside lane punch. It is like a very inside the stance kind of punch. Yeah, I just love watching it.
Very nice way of putting it.
Yeah, you know what I mean though? It almost comes up the middle. It's a really tight shot that's very difficult to just sort of incidentally block. It's the kind of hook where someone will throw their hand up, covering the entire side of the head, and it will just come inside the forearm and clip the chin anyway. So it's beautiful. Like I said, it's all just fundamental shit from Justin Gaethje. It's very, very basic, but or I should say it's very foundational, but it's nuanced. There is a real understanding of like how these shots work together, how the threat of one plays off of the others. There was one sequence I watched many times. I think it was in round 5, just like maybe a minute into the round, where Gaethje throws a 1-2-3, which is like that's the basicest basic of boxing. There's nothing particularly flashy or MMA about that combination, but the way he throws it is so nice. Again, he waits for Ferguson to just sort of wade into range, and he smacks him in the nose with the jab. What he and Whitman clearly identified is that Ferguson, he's going to throw back. You know what I mean? That happens a lot in his fights, that he ends up overwhelming someone as he sort of builds that flowing style off of getting hit. He pretty frequently comes back with something the moment he's been touched. And he did that in this fight. He did it less and less as the fight went on, because he became more and more wary of the fact that he was getting punished every time. But typically he'll come back, and then you're the one who freaks out, and then he keeps flowing and building and building. And that's how a lot of Ferguson's fights go. Even when they start out ugly, like that's how the Donald Cerrone fight went, He was just able to lengthen those exchanges. And it being Tony Ferguson, the counter he decides to try for this jab is a weird, creative, unpredictable one. He tries like an up elbow with his lead arm. But Gaethje knows that. He has figured out how to make counterpunching work, as how to, you talk about like sliding wedges into someone's game. He has figured out where Tony Ferguson's striking breaks down. And so he has already anticipated this counter. He steps in with the jab, and then he's already getting his head offline as Ferguson is trying to land the shot. But he's not just getting his head offline. He's also getting his feet into position for the next shot. And he's giving himself a moment, this sort of awkward beat missing in the middle of the combo. Nothing rote about it. And he's also giving himself a moment to line up and aim his shot. And then after he lands the right hand, he takes another look just for a second and aims the left hook. They were all very considered, purposeful punches. There was nothing wild whatsoever about this performance. And I guess that segues into the one thing I really do want to talk about, which you already mentioned, which is Trevor Whitman's role in all of this. Because one of I have so much I could say about his corner work. Because I don't think he's a great trainer, obviously, but I think he particularly stands out as a cornerman. Which is, it's like its own set of skills, like how to keep a cool head, how to inspire confidence, how to give direct, simple advice without overwhelming the fighter that you're talking to. Like, these are all things that Trevor Whitman does very well. Not to mention, like the time he saved Marquardt against Gastelum. He's a compassionate cornerman, which I also appreciate. But what I loved was that Gaethje got knocked down at the end of the second round. One of the silliest counters I've ever seen.
Oh, yes.
Like, Gaethje loads up on an uppercut, and Ferguson counters this with another uppercut, both off the backhand.
It is literally some anime shit.
Yes. Very cool to look at. Very dynamic, but nothing like textbook about like the choices that were made in that exchange. And, but it works. And Gaethje comes back to the corner, and I think he says, like, I got too comfortable or something. And Whitman says, no, you're loading up too much. He's like, forget that. Like, there's this moment where clearly Gaethje's aware, because they had this discussion between round 4 and 5 of the whole getting too comfortable, having too much fun, not staying disciplined danger. Clearly they've talked about that in the lead up. And so he comes back and he's like, oh, this is the thing we talked about. And Whitman's like, no, stay comfortable. You're looking great. I want you to be confident. Just make this one small adjustment. Take 10% off of your punches, and it'll fix everything. It'll make all the things you were doing in that round work even better. And he was fucking right. Like, Gaethje came out in the third round, immediately adjusted, was throwing much quicker, more relaxed counters, and basically stayed that way for most of the rest of the fight. And, I don't know, man. I came away from this just as impressed with Trevor Whitman as I was with Justin Gaethje. Because he obviously has a huge part to play, both in the fights and in the gym, to molding this kind of fighter.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed about after that second round knockdown is that I think Gaethje went back to his corner, and one of the officials was like motioned him to take his mouthpiece out.
Oh, and he
looked mad for a second.
Yeah, he was frustrated.
I think Whitman keyed into that. He was just like, no, don't give him something to be critical about. Don't give him something to be like self-critical and get pissed off about at this moment. Give him just some concise technical advice that is just gonna, to get him back on track. We can be self-critical. Later on, he's fine with being self-critical because they're winning.
Absolutely.
But he's just like, no, I don't want him getting emotional at this point. I don't want him questioning himself.
Yeah, and he especially doesn't want probably to like fuel the competitive fire that makes Gaethje make his dumbest decisions in the cage, right? Like, now's the time to calm down. That is that's what's going to put us in a position where we can, start to critique ourselves. And I do love that about Justin Gaethje. Like, I always love moments of brutal honesty from fighters, like self-reflection and honesty. I've mentioned a few times Frank Mir's interview where he talked about, like wanting to like find an excuse to get out of there every time, but just before he was about to step into the cage, of being like, oh my God, I hope it gets canceled. I hope somebody gets injured. I hope any number of things goes wrong so I don't have to do this. With Justin Gaethje, it's sort of like an embarrassment of riches because I feel like he's that way all the time. He doesn't have many self-delusions that I can think of. Like, this is the same guy who came in and was like, oh, I'm going to get knocked out soon. Yeah, this is going to happen. And now he's molded himself into a much safer, more consistent fighter, but he still retains that. Cause the moment you alluded to between rounds 4 and 5 when, he sat down, he was feeling really good. He was like joking with the usher type people, the officials in the corner and whatever. And Trevor was like, hey, let's not get too comfortable because the last time you got comfortable, you got stopped. And Gaethje, without missing a beat, says twice and nods like, yeah, he's like, he's not ashamed of it or afraid that it's going to happen. He's just like, oh yeah, okay. I know this about myself, so I'm going to control it. And maybe that's what it takes to have this kind of radical transformation late in his career. But I was reminded on Twitter of the terrifying face that Trevor Whitman made from the corner when Eddie Alvarez stopped Justin Gaethje. Or maybe it was the Poirier fight. But they had this one moment where they cut over to they love doing those corner reactions these days. And I like seeing them, although I did not enjoy the Aldo McGregor one. That was very sad. But they cut over, and Trevor Whitman, who's always doing something interesting in the corner, is just sitting there in that pose of his, like his chin resting on his hands on the side on the apron of the octagon, and he's just grinning. Justin Gaethje has just been simulated murdered, and Trevor Whitman is just grinning. And you kind of get the feeling that, like, he knew Justin Gaethje would actually have to realize the truth of his prediction that he would someday be knocked out to then turn him into the fighter that he probably suspected all along he could be. Had probably seen flashes of this Justin Gaethje in the gym. And now we've got it. And it's amazing. So we're already going to run long here. Do we want to talk about a little bit about Tony Ferguson and or Justin Gaethje against Khabib? Because that does seem to be the matchup that's that he's aiming for anyway.
Let's talk a little bit about Tony. How did you think he looked? I mean, I think this was difficult to call. I think in terms of, I don't think this was prime Tony Ferguson.
No.
But I also don't think prime Tony Ferguson would have won this fight.
Yeah, that sums up my thoughts perfectly. I don't think, this wasn't the Ferguson that beat RDA, but this same fight from Justin Gaethje would have thrown, I think, the exact same kinks into the game of that Tony Ferguson. Like, he just found those little moments, the nodes that as Greg Jackson would have said, where he could prevent any of Tony Ferguson's infamous momentum from getting started. And so, honestly, I was actually quite impressed by Tony Ferguson physically, to the point that I was then very depressed by the end of the fight because he was able to take a truly horrific amount of damage. But, like, he was eating those power punches like Tic Tacs in the early rounds. And there was a moment there, even before the knockdown, when Gaethje was really loading up, he'd already landed all these big shots, when it did seem like Ferguson was going to start getting the exchanges that he wanted, was going to start to sort of feel Gaethje's rhythm a little better.
Yeah, I think that bastard Zane Simon, he said that he actually compared it to Poirier Gaethje, and that it was a fight where you kind of kept expecting the turn to come.
Right.
You were just like, oh, he's going to turn it around now. He's going to turn it around now. And he just didn't. And
in the same way, that was a fight where, like, Poirier had to prove a certain new level of, like, composure and consistency that we hadn't seen from him under such duress ever before. And just, Gaethje was filling the Poirier role this time, with Ferguson being the Gaethje to his Poirier. This is a very confusing comparison, but...
Yeah. I thought, like... It might just be the narrative of the fight overcoming it for me. I did feel like Ferguson, like his body language, he looked wired in an uncomfortable way. Mm-hmm. Like I've still been getting the impression for his last few fights that he is sort of very tightly sprung. And he used to enjoy fighting more than he does.
Yes.
Like, I find that it's sort of him forcing himself into it more and more. And, there was something just kind of difficult to explain, but, kind of tight and sort of nervous about the way he fought. But again, I think that the technical flaws almost always would have doomed him in this fight. He still managed to knock Gaethje down,
sure,
but it wasn't really a replicable moment. It was only when Gaethje started doing silly shit like selling out for the biggest counter uppercut attempt I've seen since Stevens RDA.
I think because I did a Daniel Cormier hate fest with Danny Martin. I think this will be the second time I've referenced this in perhaps a week, depending on when that comes out. But if you've seen the movie Pineapple Express, there's a moment when James Franco throws an uppercut that sends his feet off the ground and he spins as he follows through on the punch. He's punching a female police officer, by the way, and says, "Welcome to the jungle, bitch," as he throws the shot. It's a very funny moment. But, that was what Justin Gaethje was going for in that moment. If he had gotten the chance to follow through, he would have launched off the floor and spun around. Once he stopped doing that, went back to the stuff that was working basically from the very start. Beautiful performance, and I agree. There's something off about Ferguson. I found it very troubling when he was angry and pushed Justin Gaethje at the end, and Gaethje very humorously said, "Being an asshole will get you nowhere, Tony." But, I also, he was probably very, very concussed. And he got over it pretty quickly. I don't think he had any idea what was happening or could have told how hurt he was or how in need of saving he was. No one has complained about the stoppage. I've had plenty of criticisms of Herb Dean over the years. He second guesses himself far too much for a high-profile ref. But it was absolutely the right call. And honestly, I wouldn't have been that upset it had been stopped sooner, but I think he probably waited for the moment when there was no longer any argument that Tony Ferguson was going to recover. So. Yeah.
And it was I think I said this on Twitter, but it was a dark and kind of bleakly appropriate way for Tony Ferguson to go out like that. The end of this insane win streak. And he was the one who never really he never got dropped in the fight, did he?
No. Yeah, the chin never actually failed. He
stayed on his feet the entire. Yeah, and I just got the impression that his mind, the thing that he'd been forcing him through all those other fights, as we said, the Pettis and Cerrone fights were ugly as hell, and that he'd just been forcing himself to the edge and past it, and cutting weight, and that he was just he'd gotten himself to the point where his mind was just keeping him up past the point when it could.
Yeah.
And that last jab that stunned him when he starts to move away. And I think honestly he was shaking his head to say, he was shaking his head at his body.
Right.
He wasn't shaking his head to say, "Don't hurt me anymore, Justin." He was saying no, I can still keep doing this.
Yep.
And he was trying to turn away because that's what he does.
That's what he does.
Ferguson. He turns away from things and he spins, and it all sort of got translated, probably by some part of him as well as the referee. It just got translated as no more, and it was about as right and true as it could have been.
Right. Yeah, good stoppage, sad stoppage, but hey.
Yeah.
Justin Gaethje 3.0.
Yeah. Yep.
Is better than Terminator
Incredible.
3. I'll tell you that much. I don't know.
That is very true. Yes. Yeah. Incredible performance. Sad like we thought it was. I mean, in some ways, sadder because if Gaethje had finished Ferguson like we thought he was going to, if he just clocked him in the first round,
right.
At least Ferguson could have said, "Oh, well, if I'd got to run my normal game, I would have overwhelmed him," and it might, people might even have been able to buy that. Yeah. But this was just dismantling.
Most of all, Tony Ferguson.
Afterwards, Ferguson was like, "I'll see you soon" to Gaethje, after he'd recovered a bit and was being, no longer quite so mad. And Gaethje, I can't remember what Gaethje said. You couldn't really hear it, but he was just like, "Sure, yeah," in the kind of, humoring him kind of way, because he probably knew that's just never going to happen.
Right. It's over for Tony Ferguson.
Never going to fight him again, and if he did, he would just get destroyed again.
He'll still have some good fights. When I say it's over, I don't mean he's entirely done as a fighter or whatever. I can't say that, but
yeah.
I have no desire to see this fight again. Because the dynamic may have been similar to Poirier-Gaethje, but it wasn't as competitive. Let's be real. There were far longer stretches of the Poirier in this matchup just battering the aggressor. So, yeah. All right, well, that's half an hour on the main event. Honestly, I could keep talking about it. It was really, truly very fascinating. But we should take a break because, boy, do I want to talk about Cejudo Cruz. And I'm going to keep you in suspense, listeners, as to to sit through this break wondering, is Conor going to talk mad shit about Henry Cejudo? Is he finally going to give him his props? Was Keith Peterson drunk? All of that and more after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back to Heavy Hands, and we are ready to talk to you about the greatest combat sports athlete of all time. All right? Who else can...
spending too much time with Danny Martin.
Who else can say, all right, that they could have 3 blown-up pictures of UFC champions they've beaten in bed with them at the same time? Huh? Who else can have a gold medal while doing that? Phil, I noticed no counter arguments.
2 gold medals.
Does he have 2?
Doesn't he?
If he does, I'm shocked that he doesn't go around wearing them both. It doesn't seem like the guy to only wear 1. Does he? Are you finding out?
Well, no, I realize I don't care.
Yeah, me either.
He's not.
He's not the greatest combat sports athlete of all time, folks.
He's apparently retired, so we...
Yeah, well...
He's a good fighter, though.
How much stock do we put in that retirement? No idea. Part of me really hopes he's retired because,
I think this is him attempting to hardball. This is him attempting to hardball Dana White, and Dana White being like, I don't give a shit about small people.
Yeah, probably. He's now reached the point where, like Demetrius Johnson...
I think this is just Dana White calling the bluff.
Yeah, that's probably the case. I don't know. But, part of me wants it to be true. Wants the bluff to be called because I want to see the bantamweight division, be the bantamweight division. I don't want to see anyone fighting Jose Aldo or Dominic Cruz for a title in 2020. So, whatever. I don't know. I'm really trying to avoid saying what I wanted to say. The thing I sort of teased before the segment began, which is that it was a good performance from Henry Cejudo. It was a good game plan. It was a smart fight.
See, that wasn't that hard.
No, you don't know. It was hard. It was
Let
even
Triple C into your heart.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we've praised Whitman and Gaethje for a great synergy between corner, fighter, and game plan. That means we kind of have to do the same for Cejudo, because this was a very good game plan, and it worked very well.
Yeah.
Similar to the main event, this was a big, tall, weird person.
Yeah.
Getting their game plan split apart by some very, very simple tools. Even more simple tools for an even weirder game plan in this case.
Yeah, I didn't even think of the parallels actually in that way, but you're right. These are 2 famously weird fighters that end up frustrating and confusing so many opponents. And then last weekend we just saw 2 people come in and be like, well, what if I do these 3 really basic things at the right times? And it turns out that was it. He just needed the right moves at the right times. And in Henry Cejudo's case, it was feinting to get Dominic Cruz moving and then kicking him in the legs.
Mm-hmm.
That was the main thing.
Yeah, so this was a hybrid of the end of the Dillashaw Cruz fight and the Garbrandt fight. Because, all Cejudo did was creep forward, feint his way in. He almost never threw any strikes, but he just steadily put Cruz under pressure. If Cruz came forward, Cejudo just moved backwards. And if Cruz moved backwards, Cejudo kicked him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it.
That's pretty much it. Honestly, from Cejudo's perspective, that's sort of, I guess that's why it was actually, oh no. What happened there? Hill?
Why did your voice go mad? Because it did. Hello?
Yeah, we're back now. We had a brief connection snafu. The internet is coming for us. Are people getting on their Netflix over there? Did I take too long making my cup of coffee?
Yes, this is all your fault.
Fuck. Yeah, honestly, there's not a whole lot more to say. It was so straightforward. It wasn't as nice to look at as Justin Gaethje's beautifully simple game plan. You know, it was a lot of just sort of like inactivity and just taking advantage of Cruz's penchant for just like moving around awkwardly. How willing he is to do that at the soonest sign of a threat. And then, Cejudo just like raking his legs. And then he caught on to something Dominic Cruz has always done, which is to like leave his feet behind and bend down at the waist when he wants to roll under a punch. And, that like anticipatory defense of his. And, one of the major problems with that is you don't really want to be taking your eyes off of your opponent when you're avoiding something. And that's really the only way Cruz avoids things. And it works great when you're like quick enough or the opponent doesn't have any notion of how to anticipate that movement. They can't time it. They're too confused, whatever. But Cruz is slower, and Cejudo has a wealth of previous fights to learn from, clearly. And so he just need Dominic Cruz in the face.
Yeah.
That was it.
Very, very reminiscent of the Aljo Moraes finish.
Mm-hmm.
Just level change straight into a kick, which was probably being aimed to catch defensive movement, but it just did many things.
Yep.
It would have hit him in the body if he'd been moving sideways. What else is there to say? I mean, it's a basic dynamic with I think both Ferguson and Cruz is that people would look at them and they would go, this guy is big for this weight class and he moves a lot. So one of the major things is that between similarities between Cruz and Ferguson is they're just big, high motion guys.
Yeah.
And people see them and they just think, well, shit, I got to catch this guy. It's just the instinctive thought is that he's constantly moving in and out and he's doing weird stuff. And I think a lot of people just find themselves thinking, I got to stop it. I've got to stop him from doing weird stuff. I've got to get in on this. And in both these fights, the much shorter opponent was just like, no, you come to me. And it was the node that was attacked. It was just the step in. I mean, but in Cejudo's case, it wasn't even attacked. He just ignored it.
Yeah.
Just did what Garbrandt did, and he just backed off. He was like, no, I'm not letting you set up like darting angled entries or anything. Every time you do this, I'm just going to step back, and you're not going to be able to create any angle, and then I'm just going to step back in again.
Yeah, well, he attacked it once.
Yeah.
It ended the fight.
I mean, he when he knew that he had an exchange, he would do it. Like when he knew, but this was the thing. He also knew that Cruz wasn't going to exchange with him, which is why when Cruz started moving backwards, he would just kicked him without fear, because he knew that he was never going to be walking into a big right hand or anything like that. He knew that as soon as Cruz was moving backwards, that Cruz was moving backwards.
Yeah.
That there was nothing coming back at him.
Right. He's already committed to this bounding. I mean, that's just a mechanical thing. Like he's not going to be able to set his feet that quickly and throw something that you can't see coming. He's committed to bounding sideways. So yeah, just fucking kick him. I mean, it was clear. I think he had a really good example to learn from, and a mistake to learn from as well in Dillashaw's fight with Cruz, where he was tremendously effective with the low kicks and then just sort of drifted away from using them. And had he stuck to them, probably would have won that fight a lot pretty clearly. I don't know.
Yeah. I thought Dillashaw started using the low kicks late and basically started winning the fight super easily. I haven't watched the fight for a while. My narrative may be all screwed up.
There may have been two phases where he brought him back, but by my recollection, it was low kicks were a pretty steady part of the diet early, and then it being Dillashaw, he was like, how do I transform this into something that obliterates the person I'm fighting? So he started throwing the high kicks, and then he just threw a lot of high kicks for the rest of the fight. That's what I seem to recall. But yeah, there's not a whole lot more to say. Like it was another really simple, straightforward performance, and less interesting because while there was, I mean, I don't know. I guess there was we didn't know for certain how good Ferguson would look either, but at least he's been winning fights recently. This one, we just got to like any analysis we made, you just undermine it so easily with like, well, but he's old and 3.5 years, and yeah, that's probably enough. But yeah, the fact that it took a genuinely well put together game plan, that he didn't just like stupid his way to a younger, more athletic guy type of victory, was all right. Good job, Henry.
Yeah,
you did it. Now go away. Okay. Well, what about the rest of the card? What else do we want to talk about? We were dead wrong. Of the two types of heavyweight fight that Ngannou-Rozenstruik could have been, it was type A. Specifically, of the two types of Francis Ngannou fights, does he go insane and knock the other person out immediately? I've lost Phil again. Or does he wait incessantly for a counter opportunity? And it turns out that he had the courage to just go out there and knock Rozenstruik out really quickly. Rozenstruik's all that very reductive analysis about having a chin and having a jab, it didn't really matter because he backed up in a straight line and ate a punch from the biggest puncher in the sport. Phil's back. Phil?
Testing. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Welcome. We're done breaking down Ngannou-Rozenstruik.
Excellent.
So let's talk about.
Yeah, No, we're not, because that fight was awesome.
Was it?
Yes.
All right. Explain.
It was ushering in the new meta of heavyweight MMA, which we had already seen introduced earlier in the card by Alexei Oleinik and was merely perfected by Francis Ngannou.
The meta being whoever does more bungalows wins?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh.
It was super good and super funny.
Just run out throwing the messiest punches imaginable. People were grabbing the frame of Ngannou doing the Todd Duffy hook, but
yeah,
but succeeding.
Yeah, I think I was making the Twitter joke right on about how like Duffy was his sensei,
yes.
And like this is some secret anime technique which had destroyed Duffy, and he told Ngannou never to throw it.
And he made it work. The genius.
Yeah, phenomenal. But yeah, the Oleinik fight was also incredible. Just because I want to mention it now, where he just went out there and just flailed bombs.
Yep, it rolled.
Doom, who looked completely panicked and tubby, and like he was trying to remember how this whole fighting thing worked.
Yep,
and like this. We thought this event would be pretty depressing, and to be honest, it kind of was. It had a lot of good to it, but it was still it was still MMA being its bleak old self. But I did enjoy the heavyweights being heavyweights, and
except for the third heavyweight fight in the card, which was both more morally detestable and just atrocious to watch.
That was the other type of typical heavyweight fight. But I mean, I also, like, just to mention the Oleinik thing, it was another one of these narratives that we saw on this card, which was people trying their best to win unwinnable style matchups. It sort of added to the whole tragedy of the card, apart from the fact that Oleinik actually won his, but again, only because Verdum completely forgot what he was doing.
Right.
But you could still see that he had a workable game plan for how to approach Fabricio Verdum. He just wanted to, Verdum doesn't have very much defense, and Oleinik was gonna run in and try and clobber him repeatedly because Verdum just covers up.
Keep the pressure on, drop bombs on him. And I actually thought he did a pretty good job of just being as safe as he possibly could on the ground. He basically just went like fully negative on the ground. Verdum, unsurprisingly, looked so much more like his old self on the ground than he did on the feet. Like it's second nature to him at this point. Was crawling all over Oleinik, like easily slicing through his guard. And Oleinik just sort of like stayed pretty low and flat, stayed very patient. And then when the opportunity came, he got out. Didn't give too many opportunities, didn't scramble, didn't freak out. He knew where he was going to win this fight, and it was throwing the damn bungalows, marching forward, just the silliest, most Russian punches you've ever seen in your life. And I did love it. I mean, I got to be honest. I wasn't as depressed because I kind of expected Verdum to look like this. Like we've seen a Verdum who isn't really interested and doesn't care before, earlier in his career. And then I thought already that we were seeing more and more of that Verdum after he lost the title. And then with a 2-year layoff on top of that. So, you know, I think I was braced for seeing that out of Verdum. I also, you know, I don't know. Verdum's kind of an asshole. Like I like him,
yeah,
but
he's a bit of a knob.
It doesn't hurt my feelings necessarily to see him lose, and I do love Oleinik.
Yeah, exactly.
The only thing that could have been more perfect would have been to Ezekiel for Fabricio Verdum, but that was never going to happen. So I'll take this.
Also, yeah, I mean, like I said, there was a lot of that kind of narrative in the card. It was people struggling super hard against really tough style matchups.
Yeah,
and a lot of the time putting on really admirable performances and just falling short. I mean, I thought Jeremy Stephens did a great job against Calvin Kattar.
100%. I'm glad to hear you say it. And it may be the last one we have a chance to really talk about in depth. So I want to emphasize Jeremy Stephens had a great game plan. He was firing his jab. He was kicking the legs. He was putting on pressure, but he wasn't going nuts. And while Calvin Kattar was having his, what looks like now, like a slow start that he's never really going to be able to snap out of, like that's just going to be a pattern of his fights. In that period, I was like, oh, Stephens isn't going to let him out of this. He's keeping the pressure on. He's kicking the legs. Kattar just kept backing himself into the fence. He wasn't letting his jab go. And when he did step in, Stephens was countering him. So,
yeah.
Honestly, Zane Simon, you know, the scum that he is, he did have a far more balanced view of this fight on the vivisection than I think you and I necessarily had last week on Heavy Hands. And he was like, hey, I know Calvin Kattar. Yes, the surface read is like he's just got better footwork and he's got these range tools. He's going to outbox Jeremy Stephens. But the thing is, he likes to step in. He's never satisfied with just staying behind his jab. Never has been so far. He wants to put that right hand behind it. He wants to line up those power shots. He's going to hit Jeremy Stephens, and Jeremy Stephens is going to then get chances to exchange. And that dynamic was there, but it was a lot more proactive for Stephens than that. It was one of those nights where he just shows up looking like he knows exactly what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always thought it was going to be a tough matchup for Kattar, but I don't think, but I think the craft was always something that he just had an edge in. But yeah, I mean, I would have thought that the dynamic of the fight itself, it just played out differently than I thought it would because, Stephens approached the fight so well. I thought that Kattar would be able to draw Stephens onto his jab more.
Yeah.
And to be able to peck at him more from the outside. But, I mean, to be fair, that hasn't worked that well for almost anyone. I mean, even Holloway had... he actually had struggled a fair amount against Stephens.
It was definitely one of his
kind of game plan.
Less impressive wins of that win streak leading up to the title. It was a very cautious performance from him.
Yeah, I mean the real difference I think in this one was just that there were points where Kattar was just like, okay, when we get into punching exchanges, I'm really just going to focus on my defense. Mm-hmm. And there was a particular point where he backed away and slipped or evaded 3 or 4 punches in a row. Mm-hmm. And you could just sort of see Stephens' mental stamina bar drop a bit. He was just he just can't do that. It's just not who he is. He's a very tough, very determined guy, but he's not able to think that quickly and respond that quickly.
Right.
And then shortly after that, Kattar did kind of the same thing to him. He just chased him with a 3 or 4 punch combo, and Stephens just got clobbered by it. And those two exchanges, for me, they set the tone for the rest of the fight for that point, because Kattar basically said to Stephens, I can survive moving backwards from you. You can't survive moving backwards from me. Mm-hmm. And it meant that Stephens, he kind of had to sell out on the pressure more, which ended up putting him into that counter elbow.
Right. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, it does show, the value of just having defense, even if you're not going to. I always talk about how it should be connected to offense. It should lead to offense, but there is also genuine value in just like letting people miss. And particularly for a guy like Jeremy Stephens, really likes to let people feel his power, likes to get his hands on people. I like that read. I think he probably had a sort of mental effect on him. Certainly drew him into more reckless aggression. And I gotta say, like, this is why this was going to be an interesting matchup. Like, in that final exchange, Calvin Kattar's nose exploded. Like, in the exchange in which he knocked out Jeremy Stephens, he mostly got out of the way of the full impact, but took like the pinky knuckle of Jeremy Stephens' right hand as they were like trading these right hands, and Kattar did a great job of reading the range on that and getting to elbow range. But even so, that right hand from Stephens smashed his nose. He was really showing no damage in the fight. And then I noticed as soon as it was over, Stephens was down, and then Kattar went and saw on the screen. He was like, "Oh fuck, my nose is ruined." So like it does show what like a hair raising sort of matchup it was. Like he still had to make this sort of like death defying read to actually get Stephens out of there. But good shit, fun fight. We predicted it as being like one of the more just easily enjoyable and meaningful matchups on the card, and yeah, it was. There's other stuff we could talk about here, like boy, I really wish we could talk about Ryan Spawn versus Sam Alvey, but I'm afraid we just have to move.
Shut your whore mouth. I want to shout out. I do want to shout out one last tragic fight, and that was Nico Price against Vicente Luque.
Yeah, he actually did okay.
Because goddamn, if he wasn't in that Tony Ferguson Justin Gaethje fight,
yeah,
he was like, all I have is weirdness.
Yep.
And if he didn't come damn near to making it work just by sheer cussedness.
Yeah, I actually missed that one live, and a friend of mine said to me, they're like, "Hey, people are saying this Price Luque fight is a war," and I'm like, "Oh, so Nico Price is doing well." Because, like, that's the best he could have asked for, is to have made it a mess.
He really had Luque in some trouble.
Yeah.
And, it was just one of those things where you just watched it and you just thought, that's as good as you're ever going to do in this fight. And it was just because of sheer willpower.
Yep.
Just keeping throwing weird stuff the whole time. So,
He's a tough bastard, dude.
Big respect to Nico Price.
It's very hard not to like Nico Price. His style is weird. It doesn't make any fucking sense. He hits super hard, and he's not afraid to go to war with people.
Mm-hmm.
Must-see fighter. Must-see TV, Nico Price. All right, let's take a break. One more. And when we come back, we are moving on, not to Smith versus Teixeira, which, again, we'll be covering in a bonus episode after the fact on our Patreon. Rather, we are looking ahead to Alistair Overeem versus Walt Harris and a couple other fights from that undercard that look interesting to us after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are looking ahead now to an event that is taking place in Jacksonville, Florida. Are all of these events in Jacksonville, Florida?
Uh-huh.
They are. I didn't even put that together. That is funny. Yeah. What do you think, real quick, by the way, what do you think about the arena experience of 249 and what I assume will be a very similar experience to these next two cards? The empty arena. I don't know. How did it feel to you?
It's fine. It's got a kind of intense vibe to it.
It's kind of cool.
With the breathing and the loud impacts.
Uh-huh.
Occasionally there's a bit of there's a moment of like unintentional comedy. Like when I think as someone mentioned on Twitter. Cejudo threw his hat into the empty arena.
Justin Gaethje also seemed disappointed when he leapt over the cage, and he was like, "Oh," he just flopped right back in.
Yeah,
there's no one to celebrate.
Or just the parts where there's like some insane warble finish, and you'll hear like this golf clap afterwards. It seems just incredible. Rude.
Yeah. It's strange. It does. I do at times. I feel that like Gaethje Ferguson, for example, would have felt less depressing. Like, I don't know. Someone on Twitter mentioned that like if you could strip out the commentators, it would probably be a very different viewing experience. And as soon as they mentioned that, I compared it to the final fight in Only God Forgives. You seen that one?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
It's just like experienced Thai fighter is just patiently and coolly beats the shit out of Ryan Gosling in like a dark room. And it's really quiet, and all you hear is just the sounds of their feet moving and breathing and punches landing. So yeah, that's kind of cool, but it can also be a little jarring and at times kind of funny. I don't know. I don't hate the empty arena experience, to be honest. It's interesting.
And it's sometimes kind of horrifying. Like friend of the show,
exactly.
Knockout Ned, I think, was saying that, especially during Ferguson Gaethje, the sounds of the impacts and the breathing is disconcerting.
Yes. Yeah, well, really one-sided fights, I feel, have a much darker tone to them without the audience like celebrating what's happening. It's just like an alley beatdown.
Mm-hmm.
So, or like in some warehouse, someone is just having their fucking life ruined. So yeah, it's interesting. It can be kind of jarring. I don't know. I don't hate it, honestly. I don't know how much of an impact it'll have on these fights, though. Let's run through relatively quickly. He said at the start of a 25-minute segment. Alistair Overeem versus Walt Harris. I don't know. Your thoughts. I'll let you kick this one off.
It just seems like one of these classic is one of these fighters' shot picks.
And any thoughts?
I'm going to say, yeah, sure.
Right.
I'm going to say Overeem's shot.
Kind of, at least.
What's that?
Kind of, at least. I mean, I don't know. I think...
Yeah.
To me, the one detail that really stands out, like, this is maybe a really painfully obvious read on this, but if Overeem can get his grappling going, this is an entirely different fight.
Yeah.
Like, Walt Harris is really specialized for the striking and has gotten quite good at it, but the problem is I don't have a lot of faith in Overeem's actual takedown game anymore. Like, his top game is still quite dangerous, but lately... the people that he's managed to take down, like he didn't have much success taking Rozenstruik down. That was a pretty bad look. He had moments, and Rozenstruik's bottom game was bad. But if he's not going to finish you, given like one or two opportunities to get top position, then he's going to need to be a lot better at consistently getting those takedowns. And the takedowns outside of the clinch, that like the shots he tried to hit on Rozenstruik were really ugly and telegraphed. And then even the clinch takedowns, I don't know. Like, they just didn't come as consistently or as easily. It felt like he was trying to force a lot of them. Those like Thai sweeps and whatnot used to come really, really easily to Overeem. And so without that, like, I don't know. Walt Harris showed against Andrei Arlovsky he can beat up and counterpunch pretty expertly, an aging veteran. And that's probably enough.
Yeah, I mean, the other point there is Oleinik, who's just a big, determined grappler, and at least Walt Harris was able to beat him. So I think, the point for Overeem, the replication point is still that Pavlovich win.
Yeah.
Because he can still do damage from top position. And Walt Harris he's always been a pretty bad grappler.
Yeah.
I mean, that Verdum fight it's not good.
Yeah, granted, it's for Doom,
but it was also just him getting instantly taken down and instantly having no idea what to do.
Yeah.
And it was bad. Just going to pick Harris to crack him and for Overeem to get knocked out.
Yep, sounds about right. I'm going to once again make a call that this might be quite a boring and slow fight. I think, I don't know. Harris did wait on the counter a lot against Arlovsky. I think it's still possible he's going to break out of that, but I think it's what he's more comfortable doing at this point. And Overeem, if that Rosenstruik fight is any indication, is a much, much lower output fighter than even he ever has been before. So there may be long stretches, and I'm envisioning long stretches perhaps between counter exchanges, but I just see Harris winning those exchanges, more consistent with combinations. He's better at finding an angle and then throwing off of it. He throws tighter, more accurate punches. Yeah, I guess Walt Harris. All right, well, the co-main event for this card is Claudia Gadelha versus Angela Hill. I don't know. I'm not super interested in that. We're mostly going to skip over it. I just think, obviously, Angela Hill has some elements of what made, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, for example, successful against Claudia Gadelha, with one critical gap being the takedown defense. And, yep, that seems like that's probably enough, given what happened to Hill in the Randa Marcos fight and the fact that Claudia Gadelha still more or less manages to take everyone down. It could get interesting in the clinch. It could get interesting down the stretch. But the dynamic is really straightforward. One that I think is...
I think the only thing that complicates that Gadelha fight is, this is one of those fights where I think Gadelha's quote-unquote older style, where she just went out and just tried to truck people super early, would work really well on Angela Hill. Randa Marcos was able to do that and tap her out almost immediately. If Gadelha tries to do what she did against Marcos herself,
right,
and just have a slow-paced range kickboxing battle, that could really end up backfiring on her horribly.
Oh yes. It already kind of has. It basically did against Nina Ansarov. I mean, she made some attempts, but I'm just not confident that Hill can stop takedowns as well as Ansarov did in that, or that she can or even has any interest in maintaining the distance as well as Ansarov did. Hill likes to close and fight in the clinches, and Gadelha's not bad with her body lock game, so.
Yep.
Seems like enough. But a featherweight fight, weirdly, Edson Barboza making that move to featherweight, even in the midst of a pandemic, he's making that move. He's taking on Dan Ige. So we have the weight class change to consider in addition to the style matchup, but this one instantly is more interesting to me. I'm not 100% sure what to expect. I don't have a really clear idea, for example, of how good a takedown artist Dan Ige really is. When people take, he can time and hit a nice sort of reactive shot in open space. That doesn't tend to be the thing that gets Edson Barboza down. At least in, the times he was taken down most in recent fights were against Kevin Lee and Khabib Nurmagomedov, and it was a lot of body lock and chain wrestling shit against the fence. Which I've never seen much of from Ige. And then a lot of Ige's other fights, he's a remarkably good, improvisational fighter in transitions. A lot of times that Dan Ige ends up on top of his opponent, he is taken down, or he knocks them down, he kind of bowls them over as they lose their feet, or he is taken down and immediately reverses and sweeps and ends up in top position. And I don't see a lot of opportunities for either of those things here against Edson Barboza, so I'm not sure he can get him to the ground. And if he can't do that with any consistency, does he have the wherewithal to put Barboza into that kind of fight that Barboza, if not always loses, always struggles with, which is the famous Barboza gallop. Can he get Barboza galloping?
Yeah, because we saw a lot of effective pressure from Ige against Bektic, but Bektic is a very slow-paced fighter given his own pace. And it's not difficult to outpace him. So Ige was able to take significant breaks against him,
right?
Or at least to just have long periods where he would just stand at range with him. Can't do that with Edson Barboza.
Right.
I would assume, but he particularly can't do that with Edson Barboza at featherweight. I expect Barboza, if he can survive the cut, he should actually be able to hurt. I think he will actually hurt people more. He will be one of the few people who can hurt people more with his hands at a lower weight class.
Probably.
Because I think it's just going to be a question of he's always been pretty accurate, but he has no snap to his punches. I think he'll be able to club people more, and his body shots will probably have a bit more of an effect.
Sure, yeah.
It's just a thought. So yeah, I mean, I think I've been very impressed with Ige of late, though. He can combination punch. He's very fearless. He's extremely active as a scrambler. He kept Gaethje up against the cage for much of that fight. But
there's still the pattern, even in the Gaethje fight, of you can look at it as Gaethje allowing him to take time off. But there's definitely, I keep seeing things where I'm like, oh, Ige has solved these like stamina issues, or I don't know, interest issues, maybe a combination of the two. And then they'll have a fight where it's like, oh, he's really, really good in the first round. And then after that, it's a little more of a toss-up. Like sometimes he slows down, sometimes he just sort of takes his foot off the gas. In the case of the Gaethje fight, Gaethje came out really hard in round 2 and started backing Ige off. And then the third round was very, very close. Like, I think to my memory, it really hinged on like one key takedown for Ige. And I don't know, like, I think to beat Barboza, you have to be able to keep him on that back foot for 3 rounds, or finish him, And provided the chin hasn't taken a big hit from the cut, then you're up against a much faster paced, much harder hitting, much quicker, and much more technical breed of striker, really, than anyone Ige has faced since Julio Arce, who beat him. And really wore him down.
Barboza is, and Barboza is far more potent than Arce is.
Yes. So,
I mean, it's an interesting one. I think it's basically a referendum on Barboza as a featherweight. I think.
Right.
If Ige pressures him early, and we see Barboza's cardio falling off, or we see he really can't take a punch at this weight. But yeah, like you said, I just like the sheer firepower differential should be colossal. But we have seen the other big hitting, dynamic, blazing fast featherweight who dropped down to this weight class, who then suddenly just couldn't really hit or hurt people, which was Michael Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
That he largely just became like, he was a bit fast. He was now a bit faster than everyone he fought, but then just wasn't really hurting people anymore. So yeah, I mean, I think I'll probably go. I'll take Barboza as well. I think you're taking Barboza. I'll take him as well. But
yeah,
I think it is the featherweight is a big X factor.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions surrounding that weight class move. Otherwise, Barboza at lightweight, as that he hasn't been winning all his fights lately, but they have looked like Barboza performances.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look like he's fallen off physically that much. So, and he's not a huge lightweight. Like, he might be able to make it work. He's always been durable. He's always had great conditioning. Like, these things will be helpful to him. So I'm going to take him. I think he's just more consistent across 3 rounds. He certainly knows how to come back and keep going in a fight where the opponent starts off pressuring hard, which I expect Ige will. But I basically need to see if Ige can maintain that for an entire fight against a fighter as experienced and unbreakable, basically, as Edson Barboza. Okay, which brings us finally to what is bizarrely a featherweight fight. This one, both fighters moving up, which on the whole, I'd much rather see than one fighter moving down late in their career. Song Yadong and my boy Chito Vera. A scintillating matchup with both of them presumably just not really cutting weight and fighting at 145, at least according to Wikipedia. We'll see if that holds true as the event draws nearer, but that seems to be what's happening here. I don't know. This is kind of interesting to me because we have now seen in a couple Song Yadong fights moments where he really fades late. And Chito Vera has gotten better and better and better as a pressure fighter and has always had just the fiery blood of a comeback fighter coursing through his veins. That is who he is. Like he's going to feel so good after Song Yadong beats him in round 1. He's gonna be like, oh, it's going to be so therapeutic, so cathartic for him that suddenly he realizes what he was born to do. And then rounds 2 and 3, we can expect a really aggressive Chito Vera, really aggressive with the kicks, probably still walking into tons of huge shots. Yadong is so fast, so good at interrupting people as they crash into the distance. And, I may love the man, but I have no illusions. Chito Vera, can be a little Tony Ferguson-esque, shall we say, with his, entrances into the pocket, can sort of just wade in. He tends to get by a lot on just like, he just sort of fearlessly sells out on a big offensive move and can definitely be countered and relies on his ability to keep doing that enough that the other person decides that they don't want to fuck with it anymore and starts to break. But that might happen to Song Yadong. I don't know. This is probably going to be one of the more intense pressures he's ever faced, if not the most intense pressure he's ever faced in a fight. So that in and of itself is really, really interesting to me. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think that there's a big danger for Chito Vera, and that's that in one of Yadong's big fights where he was up against someone whose main attribute was that they were a super tough round winner who was just really, really hard to put them. Yadong just put Alejandro Perez away. Like, survivability is not necessarily something you want to count. Slow starting survivability is not necessarily something you want to count on against this guy,
right?
Because he does have enough power to simply knock slow. Secondly, is obviously like the fact that
I'm losing you again. Hold on.
Technical wrestling from.
There you are. You're back. Let's try it.
Yeah. Secondly, is the problem that Yadong's problem of late was technical wrestling against Cody Stamann.
Right.
And again, not something that Chito is particularly going to bring to the table. So it's one of those questions where you got to ask, like, is his cardio bad in an absolute sense, or does it get worse if he's in a like?
Yeah. Is it the wrestling? I don't know. There was a moment. As well, where Song Yadong, he had a very Zabit Magomed Sharipov moment at the end of the fight with Vince Morales, where he was just like throwing a lot of power, throwing a lot of hard strikes, and then like for the last minute and a half, he really slowed down. Morales, like he wasn't able to quite pour it on enough, but Chito Vera definitely will. One other thing that is interesting to me is that, something that Chito has increasingly shown in his fights is really quite a scary clinch game. Like he's going to run into some hard counters, but I think he probably knows that if he can get through that dangerous little slice of range and get to the inside, he is a better wrestler from there. He has some sort of body lock takedown moves. But he's also really, really punishing, both with like clean power strikes, but also with just like sheer attrition and pressure in the clinch. I love that sort of Thai lock that he kept getting on which fight was that? On Andre Ewell, I think it was.
Yeah.
He kept closing the distance and getting into this position where he would have like one collar tie, but instead of grabbing the head, he sort of gable gripped his other hand, which had an underhook, clamped his elbows down, and then just drove his head into Andre Ewell's jaw, up under the jaw. And it was this really suffocating position where he was able to throw knees to the body, basically just free strikes, while keeping Andre Ewell stretched upright, with that upper body lock. Yeah, that kind of stuff is really interesting to me because I don't really have a good idea of even if Song Yadong will likely find some super impressive athletic way of scrambling out of those positions or landing a big strike. that might just replicate the wrestling success that Cody Stamann had, as just a sort of physical pressure that wears him down. But all of that having been said, like, Chito Vera is going to walk into some massive, really quick shots, and I think is very likely to get dropped hard in the early going of this fight. So I still don't have a very good idea of like how the whole thing shakes out, like whether someone gets a finish or how it would be scored.
Yeah, I mean, it would be. I think it would be nice to see Chito pull this out. I think he has been starting quicker and not getting quite so screwed up in the early going. And more recently, I think he's been showing. He's been figuring out what his options are faster, and he's going to have to do that here, because if Yadong still seems very, very tough, and if Chito gets put 2 rounds in the hole, which seems likely or possible, I mean, Chito has been. It's a while ago now, but he's been beaten by a very athletic, very quick, but still somewhat breakable fighter in Douglas Silva de Andrade.
Yeah. The question is really sorry, we had a little lag issue there again. The question is, like, does De Silva's experience account for a lot of that? How much more mentally fragile is Song Yadong potentially? I don't know. I'm going to pick Chito. Probably no surprise. I see the path to victory, and I love the man, so I'm just going to expect that it's going to happen. But this fucking internet, folks. All right, shall we wrap it up there?
That's often super helpful.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yep, I'm here. All right, we're going to wrap this fucking shit show up before the internet gets...
Yeah, let's kill this thing before it...
All right, well, as I mentioned earlier in the show, make sure you check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. We are going to be having, after that Wednesday card, we're going to be doing a little recap and post-fight breakdown of that. So, $3 a month gets you access to all of those things, and isn't that worth it, folks? Come on. Let's see. Otherwise, we'll be back next week to talk about Overeem Harris in review, and I guess looking forward to what the hell is even happening in this card? Woodley versus Burns. Sakai versus Ivanov. This looks like shit. So that's coming up for us in the near future. They really front loaded this. They're like, we only have a limited time to get in all the matchups we can possibly make. So we'll take what they give us as they give it to us. But until next week. Oh wait, hold on, Phil. Do you have a preview coming out this week?
It's a damn good point, and I'm going to assume yes.
All right. So, presumably there's a preview with Dave Castillo coming out on Bloody Elbow. I'm working on an article on... I'm working on a Ferguson Gaethje article myself. So, I don't like to promise things, but it's coming along. I'm expecting that'll be published this week. You can find all that stuff on Bloody Elbow, and find Phil and I on Twitter. Phil, the good man, is at Evil Greg Jackson. You can find me at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. And until next week, thank you all for listening. Thank you for bearing through our connection issues with us. And we'll see you then. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.